At Suffolk Downs, the racing days are over and officials are considering plans for a massive new development. This could include thousands of units of housing and office space for 25,000 people, straddling the border of East Boston and Revere. And that means questions about affordability, inclusion, and the effect on the housing market in surrounding neighborhoods. Among those raising the questions and calling for more time to get answers is the local district city councilor, Lydia Edwards. Thank you very much for being with us, Councilor.
Thank you very much for the
First of all,
opportunity.
talk about the size of what's being considered for Suffolk Downs. Compare that to even just the rest of the city.
Well, so I think Suffolk Downs in total is about 161 and change acres. It would probably be about the size of the North End, if you think about it. A third of us, about the size of the North End, a little bit larger than that, just in terms of scale. But in terms of historical precedence, it's the single largest private development in Boston's history.
Now, you say this is private, but what has you worried so far about the likelihood about who's going to be able to live there?
So I want to be very clear. I support the development and I'm excited to see a new neighborhood, but I really want intentionality in designing that neighborhood. And right now, the proposed zoning, this is a normal process, the developer proposes zoning, its own zoning. We then respond to that. And some of the concerns or some of the issues involve the percentage of affordable housing. It's still very firmly at 13%. It's looking at the average family size they seem to be planning for, which is smaller than the Seaport's family size. It's looking at even just the amount of cars that they're planning for is higher than the Boston one-for-one ratio. So when you look at all of those different things, I have concerns about who it's being built for and how it's going to impact East Boston especially.
Well, if it's intended for families, it would have multiple bedrooms. So how does that shape up here?
Well, I think there's plan for about 500 2- and 3-bedrooms, and so the entire development is 10,000 units. So you do the math. I'm saying a super huge majority of those are for probably singles and 1-bedrooms, or And when I think about that again, most families are not going to stay in a single bedroom, or studio apartment. They're going to need the 2- and 3-bedrooms. So I would love a larger percentage of looking at 2-, 3-, and even 4-bedroom apartments. I look at the average incomes as well for what families are making in East Boston and Revere, and even the affordable rate that we're looking at, which is about 70% of the AMI. That's pushing a little over $70,000, close to $80,000 actually dollars for a family to afford the affordable units, and that's almost double what some people make in East Boston, and a little bit even more so even in Revere. So what we're talking about is a community or development, I would say, that's really for people who either don't have families, there's no medical clinic there, there's no school plan there, so they better not have kids, better not get sick, and I guess would like to drive a lot. And that right now, and the way the plan looks, isn't good, I feel, for the neighborhood, the surrounding neighborhoods, and it isn't creating a neighborhood.
Well, this is next to the Blue Line, so what untapped potential is there about getting people to use public transportation or bikes?
I hope, right now in the plans, which is something I do like, is they do have a shuttle that would take and move around the development to take people to 2 stops on the Blue Line, which will be on the development. So I think what I see is the opportunity to lead Boston, if not the country, in how to take open space like this in an urban setting and truly create a neighborhood that is inclusive, learning from all the lessons, not just the Seaport, but lessons in terms of segregation, in terms of sustainability, in terms of the environment. All of these things we have lessons from, and we can look to and create, I think, one of the best neighborhoods in the country. Because unlike the rest of Boston, there's nothing there in terms of it's an open space. Other neighborhoods where we're trying to plan it already have housing there, they already have density, they have folks there that they're trying to plan around. This is that rare opportunity where we can say from day one, we're going to be intentional about the neighborhood that we're creating.
In just about every neighborhood in Boston right now, the housing market is getting tighter, even where there's no development. But how do you see this development affecting the rest of East Boston?
So I see it affecting first of all, I see it not reflecting East Boston, which is a concern for me. If you're going to build that much housing in a neighborhood that is facing displacement, it could be an opportunity for folks to move into that neighborhood, the new housing, and still be able to stay in East Boston. Well, right now, if it's so unaffordable, most people will just be further displaced, so that it's not helping the rest of East Boston. It doesn't reflect, it doesn't reflect the income. It doesn't reflect, I think, even the character in many cases of our neighborhood. A lot of the public space, or a lot of the open space, for example, is not necessarily going to be green. One of the biggest concerns I have, honestly, is the fact that it's also all privately owned. And what does that mean for my civil liberties, the rights for workers to organize? The streets are owned by one person, the sidewalks are owned by them, the parks are owned by them. All of them, our access as the public to them is at their election. They choose to let us in or not. And that's a concern. It's a real deep concern. I don't think it's being taken seriously enough by our city.
How do you make at least more of the units more affordable? Because the market here is the developers are saying this is not the East Boston waterfront. We can't subsidize this as much as other people can.
Yeah. So it's also not the East Boston triple decker or other places, and by that I mean, based on my basic math, this 162 acres was sold or bought for $155 million by the largest, the investor in the property is actually William Bruce Harrison, who's a billionaire in Texas, fourth generation. He owns 95%. So, and Mr. Harrison bought this for, based again on my math, $22 a square foot. Now that's cheaper than most triple deckers are going for. So when I hear that the numbers don't work, or that it's going to be extremely hard to make them work because we're barely making it, I have a billionaire who just bought 161 two-ish acres for $22 a square foot. My thought immediately is, I'm sure he can make it work. I'm sure he can take a small decrease in profit. I'm sure that there's a way. There's other ways, also the insistence on having public infrastructure being built and maintained by the private developer. If they were to build it and put the capital investment in there, that's fine. But if the maintenance could be done by the local cities and municipalities, that might also save on an annual basis hundreds of thousands of dollars. So I think there's also access to CPA money. There's also access to looking at linkage funds. All of these, and creating a local linkage fund or housing affordable trust that allows for affordable housing on site. So I think there's that response that just can't make it work, or that it's just, we don't know how to make it more affordable, is just an unwillingness to.
Now, if you push it another corner here, another way of solving this is you have the government put up more money. Sometimes that could mean a tax break, that could mean some other kinds of investment.
Exactly.
But some people might not like that either, too.
Well, I mean, we are dealing with a housing crisis, and the government needs to do something about it. Boston just bonded for the Bunker Hill development to be redeveloped. It's the first time we've ever bonded for housing. And I think that we should be investing in infrastructure, and I think housing is part of our infrastructure. So I'm happy that the government, and especially the city of Boston, is using the economic boom that we're in to invest in housing to assure that it's more accessible. So I think that's just what we've been doing. We use housing right now. We get linkage funds based off of development from commercial properties that we put in affordable housing. That's what the government does, and I think the government should continue to do that, even at Suffolk Downs.
This is Beyond News, and we're talking with City Councilor from District 1, Lydia Edwards. Councilor, one other thing that's going on here, with some overlap of the housing issue as well, is what's happening in the school system. You cast a thumbs down on the latest budget here for the schools. Why is that? Well,
first, District 1, the district that I represent, East Boston, Charlestown, and the North End, had the largest budget cuts. So they cut our district by $2.6 million, and East Boston High School alone faced $1.2 million cut, losing about 13 teachers. And to me, that only heightened the amount of divestment from a school. It sends a sign that the school is somehow failing, and I know that BPS would like to just link it directly to individual bodies being in the room, but if you don't consider the displacement crisis that's going on in a neighborhood, except when you're cutting a budget, I think you're only, you send a horrible sign to a community that's already struggling to stay there, that your high school and your education facilities are not worth the investment.
Now, I would have found it easy to conclude that fewer students at East Boston High maybe meant transfers to other schools, but you had a student from there talking about this at your council hearing. This wasn't just about transfers.
It was about being not able to afford to stay in Boston. It's about seeing their parents, or their friends, leave. It's about, looking at one high school that they've been going to and seeing its budget be cut, despite, some issues with infrastructure and windows and things like that, and looking down the street and seeing a brand new charter high school being built. So the kids are there, and they're being told where to go to school, I think.
And maybe dropping out to work and help pay for the rent?
Exactly. I mean, many of them are contributing to their financial stability of their families, having to work a job as well to help make sure that their families can stay in East Boston. So they're leaving earlier in order to work and help pay for those bills. And again, I believe in the weighted student formula that looks at the needs of a community in assessing the family or the individual allocation for students. I believe in that, and I've asked that displacement be part of that analysis to make sure that we take in the entire community's needs, pains, burdens as well when we're going to assess the funding for that school.
The other thing that makes this more puzzling for me is that when I looked at the latest version of the Build BPS plan, I think they were talking about increasing capacity for students in East Boston, weren't they?
Yes, and yes. So they had said, at least in a press release, and something that we were excited about, increasing even the capacity for K1, K0 students in Charlestown. And that was connected to busing students from East Boston over to Charlestown and maybe just increasing the capacity in East Boston so that we didn't have to bus, saving some money. But when I asked for a concrete timeline around that press release, I won't even call it a plan, I got none. So I don't believe it's a true plan unless you put some dates and times to it and some accountability. And that's what I felt was necessary to give to my district. If you're going to cut us by $2.6 million, then you explain your way how we're going to get out of that cut and how we're going to succeed. And I didn't get an explanation.
Finally, I want to ask you about transportation because you were one of the people participating in the Boston Tea Party yesterday. I thought you have it easy at East Boston because the Blue Line works better than the Red Line and the Orange Line. But so why were you and Representative Modero out there?
We were out there because the fact of the matter is that we don't always have it easy. In many cases, the Blue Line has stopped. We had one case where the Blue Line stopped in the middle between at Maverick and Aquarium, and people had to get out and walk on the tracks under the water to get out. So we see infrastructure pains, and we see late trains, and we see people taking the buses, but also we see people who are working their second and third jobs heavily dependent on public transportation. They don't have cars. And so if this is not right, if the public transportation isn't actually servicing the public, to then increase the fines, increase the ticket prices on the public without an infrastructure plan, without a demonstration that that's actually going to lead to better service, is a slap in the face to a lot of people.
And how does this affect all that congestion on the roads and streets of East Boston?
Look at it this way. Right now, it costs $3.50 round trip to drive into Boston. It costs $4 to take the T. Now we've just increased that $4 to take the T. So when I think about congestion, I'm choosing the cheapest route. Right now it's cheaper to drive into Boston than it is to take the T. That makes no sense.
Thank you very much for being with us. City Councilor Lydia Edwards.